Jeff Kerr is here. CBS Sports covers the NFL. It was a busy NFL weekend, and we're going to take a look back at it with Jeff here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. What's going on, Jeff?
Hey, Mike, how's it going? Of course, I joked all week. I worked the entire week. I kept telling my boss, watch Julio Jones get traded on the one day I was off. And lo and behold, he got traded on the one day I was off.
So let's talk about that trade. I mean, they get a second and a fourth for Julio Jones. What you think of the compensation?
Not enough. Julio Jones, I'm getting sick and tired of hearing he's 32 years old. He's on the decline. Well, he wasn't on the decline. He was sixth in the NFL amongst NFL wide receivers in receiving yards per game last year. He was an absolute stud. He had his highest catch percentage of his career at 31 years old. And you're telling me he's washed up a second and a fourth for Julio Jones? That sounds really ridiculous, honestly. I thought he at least should have been fetched for a first-round pick. But you got to look at it this way. T.O. was only traded for a fifth-round pick at one point. Randy Moss was traded a fourth-round pick at one point. So I guess you could say the Falcons got at least something of value for Julio Jones.
Yeah, I mean, at 32 years old, I agree with you that I don't think he's washed. But how many more Julio Jones years does he have left in him?
I would say at least 3 or 4, honestly. I think the Titans are going to get
So at 36 years old, he's going to be Julio Jones still?
I think so. I think he is one of those generational type talents who's going to be good in his 30s. I mean, he showed no signs of slowing down last year outside of the injury, of the hamstring injury he had. But you got to look at it this way, Mike. If he plays a full year, he's only missed 4 games since 2013, if we're not counting last year. And he would have had 90 catches for 1,300 yards. That would have been his 7th consecutive 1,300-yard season. He's still a really good player.
Yeah, I kind of see like Larry Fitzgerald was a Julio Jones. He was like a catch yards touchdown guy. Although Jones's touchdowns aren't quite, where I guess they're down a little bit. But as he got older, he kind of turned into a possession guy more so. Fitzgerald. I'm wondering if Jones, 34, 35, 36 years old, is he still going to have the explosion in the burst?
Yeah, you know what? See, that's what I'm concerned about. But I'm looking at. Look, 32-year-old Julio Jones, 33-year-old Julio Jones, 34-year-old Julio Jones. I still think he's going to be that big play receiver. I still think he's going to get his yards. But here's the thing, Mike. He's also not tasked with carrying the Titans' offense because you're going to have A.J. Brown. You're going to have Derrick Henry. And Ryan Tannehill is a very underrated quarterback in and of his own right. So I don't think you're going to see the numbers per se for Julio Jones, but I think you're going to see the production still there. I don't know we'll see the deep threat Julio Jones anymore, but I think we are going to see a guy who's going to be a matchup nightmare for opposing cornerbacks in that division.
How does he fit in on this Tennessee team? What's that do for their offense?
Well, I think A.J. Brown's going to be the home run threat. He was, I think, 3rd or 4th in yards per catch over the last. He's definitely top 5 in yards per catch in his first 2 years in the league. So you bring him in, you bring in Julio Jones. I think Julio Jones is going to be more of the possession guy. He's going to set up A.J. Brown for the home run threat. Honestly, it's going to benefit Derrick Henry. It's going to make him a dominant running back for another 1 or 2 years just because you got those guys up there, and he's such an upgrade over Corey Davis. Think of this, Mike. I think Mike Sando was the first one who tweeted it out, but if the Titans would have exercised Corey Davis's 5th-year option, it would have been $15.7 million. They're only going to pay Julio Jones $15.3 million. So they're getting a completely better player for less money.
It's funny because this Titans team had been kind of a plodding running team, right? What are they now?
I think they are a big play team. They lead the NFL in touchdowns since the 2019 season. They lead the NFL in 50-plus yard plays since the 2019 season. A lot of that has to do with Derrick Henry and A.J. Brown. Now you're bringing in Julio Jones to the here's an interesting statistic for you, Mike. You know Julio Jones has 58 100-yard receiving games since entering the league. You want to guess how many the Titans have?
Less than 58.
Yeah, a lot less. That's everybody. That's everybody on the Titans. That's Corey Davis, Kenny Brandt. They just haven't had that explosive receiver. A.J. Brown.
Dorial Green, Beckham.
Yeah, exactly. Dorial Green. Who they somehow pilfered to Philadelphia. I don't know how that worked, but Dennis Kelly ended up being a pretty good starter for the Titans for a number of years. But yeah, that's the impact Julio Jones is going to make. He's just going to be another big play receiver for a football team that already has big play threats. You need offense to win in the AFC, and the Titans are doing that.
All right, so in the pantheon of the AFC, where's this put them?
I still got Kansas City at 1. I still think Buffalo's 2. Baltimore, if they had Julio Jones, I think they would have been like a 1A. I think Tennessee jumps them now. So I'm going to go Tennessee 3. Then I'm going to go Cleveland 4 and like a Baltimore 4A. All 5 of these teams can go to Super Bowl. I still think Lamar Jackson and the Ravens rushing attack and defense makes a really big deal at the end of the day. But in the AFC South, all you got is Tennessee to worry about. Like, Tennessee's going to win 10 games.
Well, what about Indianapolis? I mean, they got Carson Wentz now. Come on.
They're not a top 5 team.
Well, seriously, though, like they made that trade thinking that they were there, right?
Yeah, you would think. I mean, Carson Wentz could make them that, but
I'm not sitting here making a joke about Wentz. They made that trade because they thought the quarterback.
Oh yeah,
right?
Exactly. I just don't think they did enough around him. They draft well. I mean, Michael Pittman can take the next step. I think they need help at tight end. I think Jonathan Taylor's a stud. I think their offensive line's great, but at the end of the day, the AFC's just loaded, and that's not a knock against the Colts. It's just the law of the land right now.
I think San Diego's going to be interesting. New England's gotten a lot better. You're right, the AFC. And if Denver can get decent quarterback play, that's a pretty good team roster-wise. They just have poor quarterback play. The AFC, you're right, has made a couple of changes. What's this do in Atlanta now? What's the message there?
Well, the message is they're going to pay Calvin Ridley at some point. Calvin Ridley's going into the final year of his rookie deal. He had 1,300 yards last year. I was a big Calvin Ridley defender today on Twitter, putting up what Calvin Ridley's numbers were when Julio Jones wasn't playing this year, and they were phenomenal. He averaged 109 receiving yards per game, averaged around 11 targets per game. He's going to be number 1 wide receiver. And now you're going to have Kyle Pitts, who's going to be wide receiver 2, tight end 1. You're going to have Hayden Hurst in there. I think that's going to be very interesting for them. Atlanta's just got to find out now if Russell Gage is going to be a wide receiver too. And if not, then maybe you use that second-round pick next year you got from Tennessee for another wide receiver. I wish they would have kept Julio Jones, Calvin Ridley, Kyle Pitts, and Matt Ryan. It seems really stupid on the outside, but I get Atlanta's way of thinking.
Yeah, you mentioned Ridley, and I think I saw your tweet that said he averaged like 11 targets per game without Julio Jones last year, and he averaged 109 yards a game. So obviously he's still a big receiver. They went that route. They took Julio Jones, a first-round pick, Ridley, a first-round pick. It hasn't worked out for them. So just having these 2 great wide receivers doesn't necessarily mean, but I think in Tennessee they're thinking differently.
Yeah, you know what, Mike? Back to the Atlanta thing. It's crazy. Like, they draft these first-round wide receivers. Remember, they gave up a killing to move up 21 spots to get Julio Jones, and it worked. It worked.
He got him to a Super Bowl. It did.
Yeah, I mean, they should have won a Super Bowl, honestly. Kyle Shanahan blew that. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's just their defense has been terrible, and their offensive line hasn't been as good as they thought. And they wasted first-round picks on offensive line. They've been, solid players, but they haven't been, what you would think a first-round offensive lineman would be. It really is a shame what happened in Atlanta. And now Tampa Bay and New Orleans just surpassed them, and Carolina's on the upswing as well. So if you're looking at the Atlanta Falcons, they probably should be rebuilding, but they have an offense good enough that they might just be good enough, like a 7-10 good enough, which is a shame, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because that Falcons team, after that Super Bowl, I mean, they have just gone completely downhill. And a lot of it, like we talk about a lot in the NFL, they had skill position. They had a quarterback that was an MVP. They had 2 first-round wide receivers. But if you don't have an offensive line, I think there's the message right there. Their line has been terrible. Their defense has been atrocious, and that team has stunk since that Super Bowl. And they finally made the move today. Jones didn't want to be there anymore. That was apparent, so they had to do something. Now, let me ask you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I honestly think the downfall of Julio Jones in Atlanta was when Matt Ryan threw that pass in the 2017 NFC Divisional Playoff game and it went right through his hands. Jalen Mills he made a great play, made it where only Julio Jones could catch it in that one spot, but it just went right through his hands. That's why I said to myself, Eagles might win the Super Bowl. Like, that stuff doesn't happen. Usually it's on the shoe's on the other foot. He makes that catch. Atlanta's making another Super Bowl run.
That trade, they give up a second and a fourth. What's that do for Ertz? Anything doesn't help? Does it not help?
I don't think he moves the needle too much. I mean, I think the Eagles are being very unrealistic here and trying to get a 3rd or 4th round pick for Zach Ertz because Julio Jones was a productive player last year. Zach Ertz was not. I still think the Eagles should just keep Zach Ertz and go for it at this point because there's no sense in releasing him to create more cap space. What are you doing that on June? What are we on? June 9th now?
7th.
June 7th? Yeah, June 7th. Exactly. I don't know. I just think they're a better team with Zach Ertz right now than they are without him. And if they can get a 3rd or 4th round pick for him, kudos to Howie Roseman. But I don't know. Like, they're not having a mandatory minicamp, so we really don't know.
How about that, Kerr? They're out. They're not. You will not see the Eagles for 6.5 weeks.
Yeah, it's weird, but I kind of like how they're doing this. It's a different way of thinking. Like, and I like how Dick Sirianni, like, the message to them was, look, just stay in shape, enjoy yourself. I think the extra week off is honestly going to benefit them at this point.
That's interesting because you might have the possibility, though, a guy showing up, maybe not in the greatest shape of their lives. Who knows? I mean, I guess you could find out who really wants to play and who doesn't, but you're giving guys 6.5 weeks off. That's You're putting a lot of trust in these guys, a lot of time away. We'll see. But I also thought it was interesting with Ertz because I said last week, well, we'll see if he shows up to the mandatory, forgetting they're not having mandatories because we're going to see if he was going to take the fine. So we'll see how serious he is about this whole situation. I think people are just assuming, though, that Ertz doesn't want to be here or that he would hold out. We don't know any of this yet.
Yeah, for all we know, Zach Ertz could be in the NovaCare complex right now, like, talking to them. We just don't know what's going on with this team. And honestly, it kind of buys them another 2 weeks here because, remember, they were supposed to have a voluntary minicamp after the mandatory session this week. So they were going to have another 2 weeks. And it didn't even cross my mind until Friday when I got the press release from the Eagles. I'm like, oh, yeah, today's it. Like,
that's it.
They're done.
Yep. Yeah, when Sirianni spoke, he said, look, your guys are going to be gone for 6.5 weeks. And he said, oh, well, I told them they got to come back in the best shape, ready to go. What do you think of the messaging Sirianni? Does this work at the NFL level?
I think it does for a first-year head coach because, again, guys are going to be competing for their jobs. This team was 4-11-1 last year. If you come into camp out of shape, you're going to lose it. Bottom line, like, you're going to lose your job. Like, this guy, he just reminds me of, like, he's a fun coach, but I also think he's a no-nonsense coach too, and he embraces the competition. Like, Can you imagine if you're Boston Scott, you got Kerryon Johnson right behind you. He could add another running back at any time. It's concerning. Like, you thought Boston Scott was going to be number 2 running back. The wide receivers, they got to compete. Dallas Goedert's got to compete. All these guys have to compete for jobs right now.
Drake Kirkpatrick is visiting the Saints last week. Any interest there if you're Howie Roseman?
I don't think so. I think he's too old. Like, I actually thought Rashad Breeland would have been like a cheap fix for them, but obviously he went to the Vikings, and Eagles seem to have no interest in it. I guess they're waiting on what Steven Nelson's going to do. At this point, I don't even see Steven Nelson signing for another 6 weeks.
Wow. So 6 weeks, man. He's still gonna hang out there and just see what's out there, huh?
Yeah. Well, if you're not having a mini camp, like, what's the point? You're pretty much off for 6 weeks.
Well, you can at least get the sit down with the coordinator or get the playbook or something, right?
Yeah, I mean, if he does sign, I would expect it to be this week or next week. But if he doesn't, like, at this point, just wait.
Yeah, and I know I did read over the weekend that Sherman, they said, will wait out training camp before signing with the team. So you might see, that. But Nelson's a little different stratosphere than Sherman, right?
Yeah, Sherman at this point, I honestly think he's either going back to Seattle, back to San Fran, or going, with Dan Quinn in New Orleans. I mean, not Dan Quinn, Chris Richard in New Orleans. That's where I think he's going to end up.
All right, NFL big news over the weekend, which was, of course, Julio Jones. And today, by the way, the Buccaneers re-signed their GM, Jason Light, and, of course, they revised Coach Bruce Arians' contract. He got a pay raise. And so there you go. The Super Bowl champs are keeping that front office coach together and making another run at it. They did a good job this offseason, Jason Light did, keeping that team together to make another run. All right, Jeff Kerr, CBS Sports, as the Eagles are complete. Now, for the next 6.5 weeks, they are off. So we'll continue to have we're going to look at different NFL stuff. We'll go inside the divisions, the NFC East. We'll go around all the divisions in the NFL, kind of storylines for the offseason, getting ready for training camp. So we'll have plenty more NFL coverage here with Jeff throughout the offseason here. And we got some other stuff that we're working on that we are going to be kind of breaking out here in the near future. So Jeff Kerr, CBS Sports, at Jeff Kerr, CBS, and he, like all guests, appear via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. All right, Jeff, good stuff.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, Mike, rejoice. The Eagles don't have to face Julio Jones in week 1 now.
Yeah, especially if Michael Jacquette's playing corner.
Oh, God help us all. Well, Calvin Ridley, I'll draft him in fantasy just so we can get 10 catches.
Yeah, well, say, like, you got Ridley and Jones. Slay, all right. Slay against Ridley's one thing. Jacquette against Ridley's another thing.
Yeah, exactly. But I guess that'll be the week Kyle Pitts becomes the greatest rookie in NFL history.
Oh, they got Pitts too. I forgot about that. All right. Thanks for putting a damper on it.
That's what I'm here for, Mike.
See you, man. Jeff Kerr is back on Wednesday with more NFL conversation. We got you NFL covered here on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN.